Well, welcome everyone. My name is Anthony DiLorenzo. I am a former hospital CEO, psychiatric hospital CEO, as well as a licensed trauma therapist. And I've been in the industry for over a decade, working in mental health from being a tech, with working with kids ages 5 to 18, and then after that, I went on and I got my master's, became a therapist, and kind of kept moving up from there into operations roles. I wanted to start with a story. I used to run this program that was specifically for active duty service members, veterans, first responders, and it was a very trauma intensive program. So I was trained on cognitive processing therapy and EMDR, and that's something we did daily for, I think I did that program for about a year and a half. And I had this patient. He was ex-Marine and had a ton of trauma from childhood through his deployments, et cetera, you name it. And he came in and he was just unwilling to do anything, right? He was just very closed off, wouldn't talk. It was a couple weeks in and he still just would not engage in treatment at all. And the current process we were using was very effective for those who did engage. And so I decided to kind of switch things up a little bit, and I actually learned a ton from that. I ended up starting with what where I'm going to show you today is the miracle question. So it's a huge aspect. I'll go into it deeper, but it's very different from what you see in the clinical world. A lot of times in therapy, it's what's wrong, right? It's very symptoms focused. So you got depression, anxiety, PTSD symptoms, whatever it may be, how those are impacting you. You can't sleep, you can't go out, you're isolating, substance use, right? It's very symptoms focused. What's wrong with you? And so I've really decided with this whole Architect series to shift that paradigm, and look at not so much what's wrong with you and start with what is it that you want? What are your dreams? What are you passionate about? What gets you excited? And a lot of times when you're in an inpatient psychiatric facility, you don't really have a good answer to that, right? So I went in through this process. I started with that kind of mindset, that kind of paradigm shift, and really engaged him throughout. And from there, we ended up going in and doing a lot of techniques and interventions, which I bring into the Architect series as well, because what I really want to be able to do is bring those interventions to everyone. You don't have to pay for therapy or have the insurance for therapy or whatever it may be to be able to access those kinds of interventions in a different paradigm. So, but it was powerful. Like, he was there for, I think, a month and a half. And when he came in, he had a PCL-5 score of 40, which is like the top end of what you can have for PTSD symptoms, right? And so he had everything in the book. He was having nightmares, flashbacks. He was scanning exits, heads, looking at people's hands, constantly seeing what was going on, very paranoid, right? And then from there, he did have a shift from this miracle process and was actually started engaging a lot more. And by the time he left, I think he actually did maybe 3.5 full weeks of actual treatment with me. He was below a 19 on the PCL-5, which means he technically doesn't even have PTSD symptoms anymore, which is phenomenal. And it's huge. And it really, like, when you have that experience as a therapist, you're just like, oh, your eyes are huge and you lit up, and it's just such a rush. It's so fulfilling to be able to provide that for somebody, right? And what I ended up doing, I remember coming home that night and talking to my wife and saying, you know what I want to do? I had a very clear image. I was like, I want to be able to bring this process to not just our service members and veterans and first responders. I want to be able to bring this to all civilians, people struggling with depression, anxiety, et cetera, whatever it may be. And I really want to do that like on a mass scale. I'd love to be able to even just do that for this hospital system. Funny enough, the next day, my director came to me and told me that she was opening up a new position. It was an assistant director of clinical services. And she told me I should apply for it. I didn't think I would get it because there was other people that I worked with who had been there a lot longer, were phenomenal therapists. I ended up getting it. And within a week, she came up to me after I'd already gotten the position, and she said, hey, I'm actually leaving. And so I think you should apply for the DCS, the Director of Clinical Services position. I was like, weird. Okay. I applied, didn't think I would get it, got it. And then 8 months later, I ended up there was a position that opened up at the corporate level to be over all 22 hospitals at the time, all clinical operations. And I applied for that thinking for sure I wouldn't get it because there's people that had been there for a ton of time with tons more experience. I ended up getting it. And it was just, for me, it was very clear how, when you really set your intention and you know what it is you want to do, when you start taking accountability and owning what you do in your life, things start opening up and things start happening, right? I don't know what it is. If you're religious, maybe it's God. If you're spiritual, maybe it's something else, right? I don't know. But it was just phenomenal how that happened, because I ended up going to corporate and then doing exactly that. I created the curriculum for all 22 hospitals, and it's still used. So that was just like, for me, was like such an aha moment of like, I think one of the biggest things that people struggle with, because I noticed this in my treatment sessions as well as the leadership coaching that I've done with a lot of people, is a lot of people don't actually know what they want, right? They have this idea of what they want, and but they may want 10 different things and they all conflict with each other, right? So then they just fall into this place of ambiguity, and they're like, I don't know what to do, because if I do that, that's going to fight against this thing that I want, and that's going to fight against it. And that's what leads to isolation and substance use and all those things, is that ambiguity, which is a huge aspect of motivational interviewing, which we use in substance abuse all the time. So for me, it was really obvious that there was a more refining that I could do to my process, to my curriculum. And I ended up reframing the whole thing, pulling in evidence-based concepts from cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive processing therapy, even from EMDR, and pulling it into a very, very tight, structured format that you could literally follow yourself and do it yourself, so that you can get to the bottom of what it is that's, preventing you from getting where you want to go, right? I've worked with tons of patients in a hospital setting where they've come in and they've told me what their experience has been like with their therapist. And I know some amazing therapists, so this is not throwing all therapists under the bus by any means, but the constant feedback I would get from people was that I go into session, I talk about my feelings, right? And they validate it. And I feel like I have a cheerleader, and I've been with them for 2, maybe 5 years, right? And I don't feel like I'm making a ton of progress. And I'm like, of course you're not. You're just sitting in that space, ruminating on what's wrong, constantly talking about your emotions. And there's value to being able to talk about your emotions. But when I sit down with a patient or a client, we talk about emotions and what's going on for maybe 5, maybe 10 minutes max. I'm like, all right, what are we doing? Right? Because the reality is, if you sit in that, you're just going to become a victim over and over and over again. And the whole purpose, I believe, of therapy and mental health and healing is to start looking at owning what you do, right? And taking accountability for what you do, both good and bad. And this is more so for adults, because I'm a trauma therapist. I've worked with kids. I'm never going to say that anything they ever did or said or thought was ever going to result in something happening to them. I don't believe that at all. I do believe as you become an adult, though, you start to shift, and that accountability shifts as well. And we have a lot more control over our lives than we actually, I think, realize and give ourselves credit for. We're incredibly powerful creatures, humans, right? We have the ability to create, and sometimes create things that we didn't think, that are so much bigger than ourselves, right? So I'm going to walk you through this process a little bit more high level. There's some details that are there and some, different things that I like to dive into a little bit further. I do offer individual coaching as well as group sessions for coaching, and we can dive into those even further. I do provide a free ebook. When you click the link to sign up here, you can go back to that page. There's a free ebook download that you can get. It's the Miracle Blueprint. And then I have a more fleshed out full version of that called the Complete Edition that's also available on the site. And it gives you actual worksheets and things like that you can work on throughout the whole process. So I do offer, we're going to be rolling out like a breakthrough series, which is a 2 to 3 hour group session, more of like a Teams format, kind of like your Zoom, so that people can actually participate if they want to, or they don't have to. But that way you can actually go through and say, hey, what about in this case? What about in this situation? Because it's tailored and it's very concrete, this whole process. And at the end of the day, we have different lives, we have different experiences. And so there's gray area always within mental health and within recovery. So being able to go through that process, I can help guide you a little bit more individualized and give you scenarios and experiences that you may be able to connect with that make more sense to what you're doing. So again, this is going to be a little bit more of a broader overview with this. And so let me just grab this real quick. Okay. So we start off with the miracle question, and it's really, again, shifting that clinical paradigm. We're using what's called radical accountability, which is just this. It's more of like, think of it as a kind of a thought test that you could do, right? Just imagine that your whole life, the way you thought actually created what happened in your life. The way you thought resulted in what you do and your behaviors, and that actually impacted what happened in your life, right? So when you do the miracle question, basically the first purpose that this serves is it shifts your focus. So this patient that I had, this Marine, he was coming in, he was not willing to engage in anything else. Like, all right, we're going to try something different. So now instead of focusing on all the dark cloud that you're living with constantly day in and day out, I want you to imagine, whether it's 5 days from now or 5 years from now, you wake up and you have the exact life you could possibly want, right? You're with the people you want to be with, you're living where you want to live, you have the job or jobs that you want to do. Everything is falling in line to be exactly what you want, right? And I had someone ask me the other day, what if you don't know what you want, right? I say, if you run into that situation, think of your perfect day, right? What's the best day you've ever had, right? And you can start pulling elements from that, right? Are you traveling? Are you with your family? Are you with this person, right? Whatever that may be. And just let your mind just go wild with it. Dream as big as you possibly can with it, right? And what this does is it really helps you clarify. A lot of people have epiphanies after they do this. I'll do this in a group setting, and they'll have epiphanies to where they're like, wow, I didn't even realize I wanted that, right? And it helps you clarify your values within it as well. We can break that down as well and kind of pinpoint what those values are, what you want to strive for. But it's really giving you that North Star, clarifying those motivations. And so from that, then I ask, okay, I want you to identify one belief about yourself or the world that would have to be true in order for this to happen. And so when I pull this from clinical concepts like EMDR, we have positive cognitions. It's really this core belief that I am enough, or I deserve love, or whatever that would have to be, that you believe truly at your core that everything always works out for me, right? Whatever that may be, that if you believe that, or if these things happen in your life, you would ultimately believe that, right? And I'm going to tell you why. We're going to shift into this a little bit more, but this is a really powerful thing that I encourage everyone to do. Take 15 minutes tonight, even, or tomorrow morning, whenever you're better, and just go through and write it out as though it's already here, and go into like what smells you smell, what sights you see, right? Like all those components. Make it as real for yourself as you possibly can. And if nothing else happens, you feel significantly better after doing that. I did this in a group and everyone shifted. Like they went from feeling, 10 out of 10 anxiety reported at the beginning of the group to the end feeling very little, if any. And so it just, even that pulls you into a positive mood. And it also gives you a clearer path of what it is you want. And so by clarifying that intention, again, going back to that story at the beginning, when you can really clarify what it is you want, then you have so much higher likelihood of actually getting to what you want. So this next aspect this is pulling in the therapy side of it. So something I do a lot, this is something like my 101 group that I'll do. So in CBT, this marker's not great. It's a brand new marker too. In CBT, we have something called the CBT triangle. Okay. So for those of you that don't know what this is, it's basically saying there's a relationship between our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. The next thing I ask in groups is, which of these can you actually directly influence or control, right? And which can you not? And people will go through and say what they think. And a lot of times they're like, well, emotions, I'm like, well, what I would say is directly you can influence your behaviors, right? Because you can go on a run, you can start doing yoga, whatever, change your behavior, and you'll automatically start feeling better, right? Thoughts can be challenging because sometimes thoughts pop up that we don't mean to have pop up, right? We'll go into that further. Emotions, you can't just be like happy, right? You can't just be happy. You have to either install a thought or do something that releases dopamine or whatever, right? To make you actually more happy. So the idea is that what we think creates emotions, which then result in behaviors, which then reinforce those thoughts, right? I take this a step further because core beliefs, I think the number one thing, I've seen in so many therapy groups is we talk so much about coping skills, right? But, I've had marathon runners, I've had yoga teachers, trainers, whatever, who had the best coping skills in the world, but they were still clinically depressed, right? So not always the case. And a lot of times what coping skills do is they pull you out of a situation They help you kind of distract you from a situation. But at the end of the day, you still have whatever's going on there sitting there, right? So even if you run every single day, you're going to feel better than if you don't, for sure. Put the shoes on, right? Go. But at the end of the day, if you have things festering under there that you believe about yourself, you're really not going to pull yourself out of the cycle. You're going to have to constantly just force yourself to do the good habit, do the good habit, do the good habit, right? And it can be painful. It feels like you're constantly swimming upstream with it. So one thing I add to this whole piece is core beliefs. And this is a huge aspect within trauma therapy. Because what we see is when we shift what we believe about ourselves or the world drastically, we actually shift outcomes as far as like PTSD symptoms and everything else go. And I'll show you a little bit more on how that looks somewhat in the brain. So core beliefs. Let's say I have a core belief that I'm not enough. It's really the voice of shame, right? I don't know anyone ever who's not had that belief, that thought that I'm not enough. And a lot of times we don't even realize that this is what we believe about ourselves, right? These are unconscious beliefs that are anchored deep due to experiences that we've had typically when we're younger, and then we build off of them as we get older. And so sometimes that can actually serve a purpose almost always that can serve a purpose when you're younger, usually for some survival need, whether it's physical safety survival or emotional, psychological survival. That belief has served you at some point. And because it did serve you, you held on to it. And then as you got older, it started to shape in ways that starts turning into self-sabotaging behaviors. And I'll show you why. So when I'm not enough is the core belief. Say I'm in a social situation. Actually, I really like to use the example of relationships. Say I'm in a relationship, intimate relationship with somebody, and I believe I'm not enough. The thoughts I'm going to have, well, I might have, they're going to leave me, right? That's kind of a common one we see. I'm going to do something stupid, whatever the thought may be, right? If I have a thought that they're going to leave me, the emotions I have, I might be anxious, definitely insecure, etc., right? If I'm feeling those emotions, I really see, especially in relationships, I see one of two things happen. One, we either undercompensate, or two, we overcompensate. So undercompensate is, well, we start pushing them away, right? We might be the one that actually initiates the breakup because I'm not enough. I'm not good enough, and they're going to leave me anyway, so I might as well have control in the situation, and I'm going to push them away. I'm going to isolate, right? And the other behavior I see a lot is the overcompensating. The other end of the spectrum is I might hover, and I might, look at their phone and check their texts and everything else, right? Because they're going to leave me, so they're obviously going to cheat on me. So I'm going to overcompensate in what I do. And then all those things do is they cause, usually they cause a breakup, right? Or a really unhealthy relationship. And then what happens to this belief? You reinforce it. You proved it was right over and over and over again until you reinforced it. And now look, I told you I'm not good enough, right? So this is a huge aspect of where our minds go. When I do this in groups, I'll have people go through and tell me, okay, we'll identify our core beliefs, give me some thoughts that go with the emotions, and we'll see how does that manifest in your life, right? Like you list out all the things in your life that prove that you're not good enough. This is something I love doing, is where I go, we do this a lot in CBT, is evidence for and evidence against. Evidence against, right? So this is what we call putting your thoughts on trial, right? So if I have someone says, I'm not enough. Okay, why are you not enough? Let's see. So evidence for the belief that I'm not enough. I lost my job, a car, a girlfriend, country song, right? Okay, and then evidence against. It's really good when you do these in groups, because a lot of times you get people who actually know the patient or client, and they'll say, actually, I've seen you be really, generous or helpful or whatever, right? So then we'll list those things off. What I do from here, though, is I go in and I challenge the hell out of these, right? And I really ask them to think, if I lost let's take one, my girlfriend, since we're in relationships. You lost your girlfriend. Did you lose your girlfriend Is losing your girlfriend make you not enough? Or is the consequence of believing I'm not enough causing you to lose your girlfriend? And this flips that radical accountability, right? And I had a lot of people who were like, oh man, you just called me out. This one guy I remember. And he was just like, oh, you called me out. He's like, but you're right. He's like, I've had like 10 relationships in the past 2 years and I've sabotaged every single one of those. So it's not actually, that's not the reason I'm not enough. That's actually the outcome of me believing that I'm not enough, right? So that's the key shift. When we start taking that ownership and realizing that what we believe is actually manifesting in what happens in the circumstances in our lives, it's pretty apparent, right? So going through this, we start with what's, the positive, that North Star, the miracle blueprint, right? And then we move into this education so we can start grasping, all right, what am I actually thinking and believing about myself that's coming up in things that I don't want in my life and circumstances that I don't want in my life. And when I have that miracle question, I always ask, what prevents me from achieving that miracle, right? So I have people list out the barriers, and a lot of times it'll be things outside of them. Like, I don't have enough money to start the business I want. I don't have this, whatever. And then what we'll do is okay, what's the one biggest barrier that if you were able to let that go and resolve that would actually get you the closest to your miracle, right? And so they identify that, okay, it's, I don't have the money to start the business I want or whatever it may be. Okay, what limiting belief can you now associate with that? So this is the hardest part for people at sometimes. Sometimes I'll have patients or clients and I'll give them a list and I'll say, here's a list of limiting beliefs, right? I'm not enough. I don't deserve love. Could be guilt. It could be I did something wrong, right? Whatever that may be. And that's in the handbook as well. And you go through and you're going to identify the one that kind of hits you the hardest, right? The one that really has the visceral response. I've given this list to clients before to have them look through it and just see them start bawling when they hit the right one, right? And that's a really good sign. That means you've narrowed in on what that belief is. And that's typically the step point between you and the life you want, right? So now we've got that belief. And we come back, we plug it into the CBT triangle, look at how it's manifesting in things in our life. And we challenge anything that comes up with that evidence for. So we go through that whole process and challenge. You can do this on your own. I've done it on my own many times. And here's that limiting beliefs list. So yeah, there's a responsibility has two kind of categories. The difference between, Brene Brown says this really well, the difference between shame and guilt. Shame is I am something wrong. Guilt is I did something wrong. And so those beliefs can really live within one of those two buckets where I am something wrong, meaning I'm not good enough. I don't deserve love. I'm ugly, whatever it may be. I did something wrong is I should have done something different. I did something wrong. I should have known better, right? Then there's a safety and vulnerability where I cannot be trusted or I cannot trust myself. I cannot trust my judgment or I can't trust anyone else. Then there's control and power, which is a huge one that comes up. And everyone has this in little bits and pieces, no matter what, where it's I'm not in control. Because a lot of what we do in this whole process is how do we let go of that control so that we can actually have control? It's kind of a paradox, right? Because going back to that story where it's like, I knew what I wanted, but I wasn't desperate for it. I knew what I wanted in a way that was like, yeah, it's going to happen, right? Like I let go of control trying to get to that. And sure enough, being patient and being persistent with that belief, things started happening, right? So control is a huge, huge aspect that I think every single person, and myself included, struggles with because life is a lot about, I think it's about two things, honestly. I think it's about like love and attachment, right? We connect with things. And then it's your ability to let go, right? Which is insanely tough. And this whole process gives you very concrete steps to be able to let those things go so that they're not getting in your way. And what we focus specifically on in this curriculum is your ability to let go of that belief about yourself or about the world, that the world's unsafe or whatever it may be. So what does it mean to let go? I spent a lot of time thinking about this, which seems funny, but my mind went crazy thinking about this. But in my undergrad, I studied philosophy and I really loved my philosophy classes. And one of the big things was really diving into like breaking things down to the most basic principles, right? I started thinking about letting go and I'm like, we let go all the time. maybe more physical, but like we yawn, we cry, you know, use the restroom, right? You fall asleep. Falling asleep, you have to let go of your day. One of the reasons a lot of us have trouble falling asleep is because we're ruminating on a thought, right? It just keeps going over and it's like stuck, which a stuck point is a huge part of cognitive processing therapy, funny enough. So what does it mean to let go? We do this all the time. And so as I've done a lot of this work, I've realized there's different types of letting go, but they all kind of go to the same place. So we can have a cognitive resolution, right? If we're thinking of a problem in our head, and like I'm very logic brain. So, you know, I might have like a numbers problem in my head and it's not, I have to get up and I have to finish it and solve it. And then I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Cool. Now I can go to sleep, right? So there's some sort of cognitive resolution that occurs there that allows you to let go of that ruminated thought. But then there's also emotional resolution or emotional release. And that's why like crying is so cathartic. A lot of us hate to cry, but the second you do and you let it go, you're like, you feel 1,000 pounds lighter, right? So there's different emotional tools that I bring in along this process as well to give you kind of connections to that part of yourself that needs to let that go emotionally, right? And a lot of times, like, honestly, there's a huge correlation between emotions and what you somatically or like feel in your body. There's actually research that shows this. There's a whole evidence-based trauma therapy. I can't remember what it's called. I participated in it once. It was cool. But you do certain like movements with your body and you do it while working through your trauma. And people will actually report, this is done a lot with veterans, they'll actually report a huge improvement in their overall mood. It's like they almost like physically let it go. But it was like also emotional too, right? They'll do like a stretch and they start bawling and it's weird, but it actually is true. And so we do different exercises. One of the things I always recommend is like, have a playlist that no matter what, when you listen to it, brings tears to your eyes, because you just need those times to be able to let some steam out of the kettle, because otherwise it builds up and it just sits there, right? So there's a couple of tools that we go through in this whole process. And at the end, when we go through the deeper series, I actually walk you through an actual evidence-informed process to step-by-step be able to let go of whatever that attachment is, which is awesome and very, very powerful. So one thing I like to talk about when we're talking about trauma. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist or a neurosurgeon or anyone that would know much about the brain, right? To be real, a lot of us, even those professionals, a lot of times we don't know a lot about the brain because it's very, very complex. However, when we talk about the stuck points, right? And when we talk about these beliefs and these thoughts, there's a visual I like to use. Whether it's completely accurate or not is besides the point, okay? So pretend this is a cross-section of your brain. Your amygdala lives, kind of right there in the center of the brain. It's what amygdala is responsible for it's like your emotional center, right? And so in the front of your brain, you have more of like your executive functioning going on. What we see is, and the reason I'm using this image, I'll show you why. When we have thoughts that are so distressing, they become stuck, right? And that's why we use stuck points. And the stuck points are synonymous with the limiting beliefs, right? So what we believe about ourselves gets stuck. And what happens is you have this belief, right, that I'm not enough. And when we think about things or things target that prove that or make us feel that way, this amygdala, this center becomes, probably not literally, but the idea is that your thoughts can't get through and be able to process through, right? The reason I bring this image forward is because when we do the newest research that's coming out with EMDR, there's an EMDR 2.0, and it's really, really awesome stuff that's coming out. There's this whole thing with EMDR. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And the whole idea was that you would follow, a finger or you do some sort of bilateral movement, because it was going to, like, the thing I was trained when I first started was it was going to tap into some REM cycle, like your sleep cycle, which allows you to then fully process through it, right? Because your eyes are moving like they do in rapid eye movement sleep. But the research that's coming out actually suggests that it's the dual awareness. So you focus on a trauma and then you do an activity that's basically distracting, very different. So you could seriously like focus on your trauma target, and then you could do like a math worksheet while you're thinking about that. And so that dual awareness, actually, the theory behind it is that it suppresses the amygdala emotional response so that you can then process those thoughts, those beliefs. in a more fluid way. And that way, once you're done with it, you do notice it's a huge desensitization to that process. And the theory there again is that we've suppressed that emotional response. So now that we can actually digest that information and be able to work through it more in a more healthy way. So it's not just sitting there and festering, right? So the activities we do in this, one is like cognitive, being able to challenge it from a very logical standpoint, because for me, it's like, I provide tools and exercises in both categories. And then the final one, we bring it into this process where we actually use desensitization techniques to suppress this when you're processing through whatever's stuck. And then it's kind of it's pulled from concepts of EMDR, but it's not true EMDR. And so it's something that you can do yourself, and that I do often. And I actually helped people literally explaining it to them and then having them do it on their own. They come back and like, yeah, it's like it was completely bothering me every moment of the day, and now I hardly even think about it, right? All right. One thing I wanted to bring in here is a lot of times we think, well, I don't have the skill set to be able to do that. I don't have the strength to be able to do that. And one of the things I hated when I was, writing treatment plans for people, one of the regulations, you always have to write, you have to name 3 strengths and name 3 weaknesses. I always thought it was such a funny thing how to describe someone was their top 3 strengths and their top 3 weaknesses, because really they don't exist in vacuums. They exist on a continuum, right? So the one I like to use a lot is generosity. Okay. Generosity can be a huge strength, right? But you could overcompensate it or undercompensate it. If you're not generous enough, you're like a stickler, and you probably don't have good relationships. No one wants to actually, be around you because you're just very coveted. Too much generosity, you're walked all over, you give everything away, right? And so I really don't see a weakness as its own separate thing. I see a weakness as an over or under compensation of a strength. So it's not until we learn the value of what that strength actually is and set those boundaries on it that we can make it a consistent strength, right? I just think this is a really important thing to bring in, because one of the things I hear from so many people is, well, everyone tells me I'm stubborn. That's such a common one, stubborn, right? Hospital environment, you have a lot of people who are unwilling to seek help, or they might, but I was like, stubbornness is it's not a weakness. Stubbornness is actually an overcompensation of a strength. I mean, stubbornness can be viewed as something that's like, you're very, I'd say like persistent, right? Persistent or resilient. There's like 2 strengths in that, right? But when you're so stubborn you won't do anything, then it becomes that, right? And then when you're not resilient and resistant or persistent at all, then you just kind of give up, right? There's no will, there's nothing there, right? So I see the strength as something that's at the top of that, whereas the weakness is the over or under compensation of it. So just wanted to throw that in there, because I think a lot of times we think we have to have certain skill sets to be able to process and work through these things. But I mean, you have them. One of the things is, as I was thinking about letting go, is like, why is it so difficult to let go, right? We all have done it before. We know we need to do it in certain situations and certain things, but sometimes it's just such a hard thing to do. And I tie this back to what trauma is, right? So trauma is not the event itself, right? It's your experience of the event. It's your experience of the event that shifts your belief about yourself or about the world so drastically that you now have a new identity that's built in there, right? So 2 people could get in a car wreck. One person, same car wreck, one person could walk away traumatized, the other one could walk away completely fine and not have any trauma at all, right? So I always think of when I had military service members, you could have a service member who had a really healthy childhood, and they were happy, they had a happy family and everything else, and then they grew up, they went off, and they were deployed for 12 months, right? And they were in a war-torn country, constantly looking over their shoulders, surviving, right? So what happens in this childhood, this core belief, whether they're aware of it or not, there's this belief that I am safe, right? Or the world's predictable, right? Very synonymous. Then they go off, they're in combat, and now their belief shifts, and it typically shifts during that deployment, but they don't experience the symptoms often until they come back, right? Until the stimulus is not there anymore. So now it's like, I am not safe, right? And so this huge shift, this 180, is so drastic that now your core belief is that I'm not safe, to the point where you're in a safe community, but you're constantly scanning exits and seeing how many people are in the room, and never having your back to the door, and waking up in the middle of the night with flashbacks and nightmares, etc. Right? And the reason we know this to be true is because when we have patients go through the cognitive processing or the EMDR process, and they come out and now they believe this, whereas they realize they believed that before the process, they actually stop doing those things. They stop scanning the room. They stop, having nightmares and flashbacks. And so it's such a strong correlation to the outcomes in our symptoms with what we believe about ourselves in the world. And that's why I know that we go in and we change that belief, and we put into something that we really want to believe, then everything else starts to unfold from there. It's powerful. What I do a lot of times with people on this is you identify that belief, right? You say the belief, or stick with I'm not safe. Okay. All right. So we have this belief that I'm not safe. What I'll have clients or patients do is, okay, we have that. Actually, I want to use a different one for this, just because it's so relatable, is I'm not enough, or I'm not good enough. The next question I ask is, how old is that part of you that believes that? People will often, so a lot of times they'll jump right to it. Oh, I remember I was 6 years old and this X, Y, and Z happened, right? Sometimes it'll be like, okay, I'm having a hard time getting there. Okay, when was the last time you felt like that? And then the last time. And then we do this like an EMDR, we call it a float back, right? And so we're looking at what are these experiences, and then where's that first experience where we truly believed that we weren't enough, right? Because when we had it then, again, it might have been something that helped us survive at that time. But as we got older, we start developing maladaptive behaviors and forming unhealthy relationships, etc., because we still believe that going in. And so now it's, how do we get back to resolve it at that time, or at the worst time? We do the first or the worst. And that way, once we can resolve that belief, now we've removed that barrier. So now we're on our way to getting our miracle, right? So I have people, once you go back here, is like, identify how this served you. What needs did it meet? Okay, now today, how does it serve you? What needs does it meet today, right? Because a lot of times we're not even aware that we're still holding on to it. And then when we are, we're like, oh, well, it serves me in this way because I don't get in relationships where I'm going to be unsafe, or where someone's going to hurt me, or we think that's true. But when we break it down logically, we find that it's actually falls apart. The whole argument falls apart. And so what I do is, when you say, okay, today, let's create a T-chart, and I call it the lift versus limit, really the pros and cons, ways that it lifts you and ways that it limits you from getting to where you want to go. So what is the way that I'm not enough serves you, and what's the ways that it works against you? And then I go and I challenge anything on the serves you part, right? Because we can, again, go back to that same process of how does it actually serve you, and does it ultimately result in something that works against you or works against the people you love, right? So being able to break that down is incredibly important. We challenge that, and then we find out, okay, if there's ones that we can't challenge, is there another way we can meet that need that's in there that's not going to be self-destructive, right? Is there a way we can meet that need that's actually helpful to us and helpful to, our loved ones? You can even take it back into that triangle and say, okay, this is what I believe. How is it hurting? How are my behaviors affecting those I care about, right? Because sometimes it's not just about me. Sometimes it's those that I love. So is it making their lives worse? And then this is my favorite part of the whole process, because it's something I didn't do for a while because it wasn't in our curriculum. But it's something I started doing because it was something that I realized that we needed to clarify. This is a big part of why people can't let go of those beliefs. Because we need to know what's preventing us from letting that go. And a lot of times, most of the times it's fear, right? How will I meet that need from before, right? Or what might happen if I let go? Or who am I without that part of myself? This is one of my friends came up with. I was like, wow, that's powerful. Like, you've been living with that belief for so long, you don't even realize who you are if you don't believe that anymore, right? That fear can be like paralyzing. If it's grief and loss, will I forget? There's this fear, if I let go, I'm going to forget who they were, or I'm going to forget how they look. And so I hold on to that pain, and I carry that baggage with me because I don't want to forget who they are, right? Which is not accurate, right? Like you can let go of that baggage and still remember someone for who they were, which you find time and time again with grief. Will I repeat the mistake? So if I did something wrong, I had a patient who had like robbed a convenience store in high school or something, and was like, I think late 20s or early 30s, and still holding that guilt, right? Because he was beating himself up because he didn't want to repeat that mistake again. For as far as forgiveness goes, if I let that go, am I saying that what they did was okay, what they did or said? Am I giving them like a pass? No, you're just not willing to carry that around anymore, right? They can carry that, but you don't have to, right? So those are the questions that we start breaking down, and we go more in depth, and those just open up a really good reflection. Honestly, if you're having difficulty letting something go, ask yourself, what's preventing me from letting that go? And then ask yourself those questions. How will I meet that need? What might happen, etc. I find when it's not fear, it's more of a sense of worthiness, like this internal core belief that I deserve to suffer. And what's interesting, when I hear that one, like I deserve to suffer, I say, okay, think of someone you love or respect, like that you really admire, right? If they were to do the same thing that you did, or had the same circumstances as you had, would you say they deserve to suffer? And usually they're like, no, but sometimes they'll say, okay, yes, okay, all right, fine, right? Now what I say is, okay, grab that belief, plug it back into the triangle. I deserve to suffer, and go through that whole process of, okay, emotions, right? And then down to behaviors, where you look at how are those behaviors affecting other people, right? Because a lot of times when we feel like we deserve to suffer, we actually end up making everyone else's life miserable. And so when you can realize that, you realize that I'm actually not doing anyone any good, because my mom's always worried about me because I always think I need to suffer, right? So breaking that down, this allows you to that cognitive resolution piece of it, so that you can get to a place where you cognitively understand what's going on and being able to solve that on a cognitive level. So I give you different cognitive tools for letting go. We just went through the thoughts on trial, being able to challenge that. There's also other ones like the shadow visualization, which is a little bit more intense and kind of a crossover to the emotional side as well. Looking at cognitive distortions, you can go into that, and ABC charts and responsibility pie charts, one of my favorites. And then emotional letting go, it's more of like journal exercises. So one thing I like to have people do is, one of my favorite ones ever, a buddy of mine, another therapist, and we used to run this group all the time, and we loved it. We would have patients think of someone they love, and that has made their life just so much better, and it wouldn't be the same if they weren't there, right? Think of someone like that and write them a letter telling them how grateful you are for them, right? Then I have them read it out loud if they're comfortable with it. They would read it out loud. And so writing it down hits one nerve, saying it out loud hits another. And then the third part is I have them actually call them. Had everyone leave group and go into their own rooms and make a call, those who are willing to, and read the letter to them. And they would come back just like a huge release, huge emotional release. And you could do this, and then you can blame me. Just say, hey, I saw this guy online and he told me to do this, and so I thought I'd give it a try. that way you can kind of have that. But it's huge. It's powerful for both you and the person receiving that. And sometimes, I've had it where people won't receive it, and that's okay too. But at least you got to say what you needed to say, because you can't control what they do. You can only control what you do, right? All right. And then the last part I'm going to kind of go through is something I do more in the breakthrough sessions as well as like individual. And that's really, so once we've gone through and done all the cognitive challenges and all the emotional challenges to break through and really get what we need out of there. You don't have to do all of them. Find the ones that work for you. And I'll send out this PowerPoint too, along with the recording of the video tomorrow. And so you'll get all of this, you can see and kind of work through it yourself. But once we've done that emotional and that cognitive, those tools there, then we go into a desensitization process. So going back to your miracle belief and identifying what is that limiting belief that's preventing you from getting there. And then we have that limiting belief and we create an image with it, right? You can create it visually in your head, or you can draw it or whatever. I've had people do many different things with it, but you want to give it a whole shape, right? So you want to have the belief, you want to have the image, you want to have the thoughts, the emotions, where you feel it in your body. You want to have every single aspect of it so you can really hone in on the whole thing as a whole. And so what you do then is you work through that. You really get into that space and really feel what's going on there and just kind of noticing where your mind goes. And then we do that dual awareness, right? We do an activity. For me, I'm logic brain, so I like doing math problems and puzzles. You can literally do that while you're doing a puzzle and watch how when you take a break after the puzzle, going back to that original thought and notice how it shifts. And it does. It starts moving because you start associating different things with it and you start bringing in different insights into it. It's very powerful. And then as you go through that and do that for a little bit, then you pull back and you come back into your miracle question. And so, especially if you have a hard time, like really getting out of it and you don't notice it moving too much, you go back to that miracle question because that shifts your mindset pretty quick. Right. And something else I do in the breakthrough series is I do this powerful breathing exercise. If any of you have ever followed Wim Hof, fantastic, amazing breathing exercise, really shifts your mindset very quickly. You can also look up holotropic breathing exercises, very similar, but they're very intense, powerful breathing exercises that really do drastically pull you out of a state and put you into another state very quickly in a matter of minutes. So those kinds of techniques that you can do to pull yourself out of it. And every time you pull yourself out of it and you go back in, when you go back in, it shifts. Every single time it shifts. And then eventually it's like, okay, cool. It shifts so much to where it's blurry or now it's has light to it or something else, right? Okay, now I'm going to go back into that miracle question. I'm going to identify that belief with that. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do a puzzle while I'm doing it because now I'm allowing that belief to seep in. And so we go through this process in much more detail in the breakout groups and the individual sessions. So if you want to join that, please do. I'm going to throw the link in there for you all to be able to sign up for that as well. And so, sorry. Yeah, I'll throw the link in there for you to be able to sign up for that. And then you also receive an email that will have a link for you to join the breakthroughs, as well as the recording of this video and the PowerPoint for you all to follow. Yeah, I appreciate you all being patient with me for my first round of this. I have the content. I've had the content for years and developed it and mastered that part of it. But the technology and that side of it has been a little bit more of a challenge. So I appreciate you all being patient with me on this. And yeah, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. And I will answer those for you. Otherwise,